receivers.
Wide receivers. They will be at the top of everyone's mock draft and draft sim over the next couple of weeks as we lead up to the NFL draft. Matthew Collar, ESPN's Courtney Cronin here on Purple Daily. We've got some fun guests for you. Catherine Terrell will come up. She covers New Orleans Saints for ESPN at 2:30. And we're going to talk to a linebacker from Florida, David Reese Jr. The second. And I'm very interested to find out. He's a guy that's sort of on the bubble of being drafted, how he is making a name for himself when we are dealing with quarantining. So let's start off with wide receivers, Courtney. I wrote for our website about the plot if you were going to ignore receiver in the first round or even in the second round and kick that down the road. And it does fill a lot of positions right away. It just leaves you walking a pretty serious tightrope with the receiver position.
Sure, and I think that a first-round receiver is the route that this team has to go in order to address the concerns that you have now in filling a very big void left by Stephon Diggs. Now, I wrote something this morning, just kind of in evaluating where Irv Smith goes from here. And I think it honestly is very possible that the Vikings could already have a big chunk of a replacement in Diggs already on their roster with Irv Smith because, as we know, tight ends were pretty underutilized for the most part in the passing offense last year. And when you think about how important the tight end is when Gary Kubiak is calling the plays and from his offenses over the last 15 years or so as an offensive coordinator or head coach, that typically is the number 3 receiver. Now, that's obviously part of the equation, but you still have to factor in they need that guy, and it's probably going to come from the draft. And an article today, I know that you referenced yours, what you and I have also talked about with T. Higgins. That's an article that Matt Bowen of ESPN wrote, and just kind of why he would fit in this offense and what he brings to a very heavy play action system. I feel like we got a lot of pushback. And I yesterday did a draft sim where I took Higgins in my mock and really did not sit well with a lot of people. And I was kind of surprised by that, to be quite honest with you. I've done one with had Denzel Mims in several of my mocks before. That didn't seem to bother people, but I don't know if it was Higgins himself or just the thought of a first-round receiver, which is why I think we kind of need to dive into that and debunk the notion of, where have all the good first-round receivers gone? Because, yeah, it's been a couple years where you haven't seen, like, a big multitude of these first-round receivers, A, chosen, and B, pan out. I don't know if this fan base is still gun-shy with what's happened with Cordero Patterson and Laquan Treadwell, but I think it's something we certainly need to address because this is a major hole they have to address early.
Well, let me just touch on the first part first with whether it was T. Higgins that people would specifically have a problem with. NFL.com compares him to A.J. Green, so I'm good with that. And if you think that you know which receivers are going to succeed and which aren't, I have a news flash for you there. You don't. Because Laquan Treadwell, if you go back and do all the research on him, you will find that a lot of people, a lot of draft analysts, everybody who studies this thing, a lot of teams had him above Michael Thomas. That's not how the cookie has crumbled, but that's football in the draft for you. You draft based on your process, and Laquan Treadwell was a big star in college. He was thought of that the injury was still kind of hampering him a little bit and that he would get even faster as he went along. And he was the contested catch guy. He put up huge statistics at a very big school. I mean, so there's lots of reason to say this is a guy that will succeed in the NFL. It did not happen because he couldn't separate and didn't know route running as well as he needed to. Maybe you learn from that. But if you go through, there's a lot of receivers over the last few years who there was every reason to think they would succeed or every reason to think that they wouldn't. How about even take DK Metcalf last year? Drops in the second round. Everyone's like, oh, his hips are too stiff or whatever. And they found the right role for him, and he used his freakish athleticism, and it worked out. So you don't know which are going to work out. We can only talk about the process of whether they should pick one high or whether they should wait. There's no doubt that they need a wide receiver. I do wonder about putting all of your eggs in one basket as opposed to drafting someone, say, in the second and then someone else in the third and giving yourself two shots. And last year is one of the reasons that I think that, because the top guys were largely last year pretty good. Marquise Brown was good. N'Keal Harry's not good, but Deebo Samuel and A.J. Brown were both excellent. But then you get into the second and third round, and Metcalf worked out. Deontay Johnson for the Steelers worked out. Terry McLaurin looks like he could be a straight-up star. So, and even Hunter Renfrow goes in the fifth, becomes at least a starting wide receiver. So I look at it, if you're giving me those two options, take one guy at 22, or take one in the second and one in the third. I probably take the latter option in a really deep draft.
But that's the thing. How can you be so sure that the guys that you would want that are on your board at the positions that you want at the second or third round are going to be there? By the time you would draft in the second or third round, assuming you're saying either trade back from where you are in the first round to get more picks or use 25, 22, and 25 differently. Like, we've gone through a lot of the mock drafts, and certainly you cannot predict or really truly know how it's going to shake out on draft night, where the run is going to start, but you can kind of project that. I mean, Rick Spielman talked to us about it last year, projecting the run on guards, or was that 2 years ago when they started to see it happen in the first round after they took Mike Hughes? I'm pretty sure it was the first, yes, 2 years ago. Like, teams are tracking this stuff, and when you're in the draft room, wherever it is on draft night, that's something that you have to be cognizant of. And I don't think it would be a reach at that point to get somebody at 25. I mean, I think cornerback should be your number one concern, trying to fill that hole and address that with 22, because there's probably going to be a host of picks that, are high on your board that you would like to have at that position. But also, why not 3 picks later go and address somebody to try to fill the void or begin to fill the void and compete for that number 2 receiver job along with Tajay Sharp? Why not do it there? Because I just don't think you can hedge all your bets, considering where we've seen the run happen in previous years, and also where a lot of draft analysts are projecting the run to happen from this receiver group, that you'll be able to get the value for what you want at your second or third round pick. Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with a second or third round receiver. And I know in referencing the draft that got people all cranky yesterday was I actually took Denzel Mims. It was Higgins when we had Austin Gale on the show on Tuesday, and he drafted it. And that was the one where I traded up to get Tristan Wirfs and realized that was not smart. So I'm not going to do that again. But yesterday, it's like I got, in my draft sim, the way that it shook out was I got a 4th round pick, and I had a 4th round pick, and I spent it on Tyler Johnson out of Minnesota, who is, I don't know if it's just like a local bias that we have here, and obviously seeing him in Big Ten games throughout the 2019 season, but also seeing where his draft stock has risen, I think you can get good value and get another receiver there. But when it is this big of a glaring need, and when you just can't rely at 25 or 22 on drafting an offensive tackle and expecting he's going to be right away ready for you in the NFL, I think you're better served to get a receiver there.
Yeah, I usually don't think much about how much they can impact right away, because it's not how.
Well, this team's going to have to.
Yeah,
I know, but this team's going to have to.
That's...
That is the reality of the situation. They have put themselves in this situation above any other year. They have to hit on their draft picks, particularly at like 3 positions right now, because that's just the nature of what happened in free agency.
And I don't think you can ever realistically expect that. I don't disagree with what you just said. This team has to hope to hit on those draft picks. It's just, for me, if I'm draft simming and if I'm the general manager who's not worried about losing his job, so you're just doing it comfortably, thinking about the direction of your team, then I'm thinking much more of, let's make sure that we get people who can be players for us for a very long time. But I'm running a draft sim right now to just see how this works out, and at the same time poking through some past history. If we go back to the 2018 draft, so you have DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley are the first 2 wide receivers picked, and they're both okay. Ridley had a bunch of touchdowns 2 years ago. Moore is kind of the only guy for the Panthers. But we get into the second round and the third round, and there's still guys who have been impact players for teams. And I guess that's where my philosophy comes from is, like someone like Cortland Sutton, who might be a star, DJ Shark for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Michael Gallup for the Dallas Cowboys. Those are all good wide receivers in the NFL, taken in the second and third round. And me doing my draft sim here, if I take first Javon Kinlaw and Trayvon Diggs as my first 2 picks, I still end up with my 3rd and 4th pick, Michael Pittman Jr. and KJ Hill from Ohio State, who's really good at the Senior Bowl. And if you're asking me, do I think that there's a better chance that either Michael Pittman Jr. or KJ Hill becomes a very good wide receiver, or the guy that we take in the first round becomes a great wide receiver? I would say I'm going to take the shot at probably hoping for one of those guys becoming good, as opposed to, hey, the late first round wide receiver that often goes bust, but could potentially boom as well.
You just can't project it, though. Like, that's the thing. I mean, you can't project that they're going to hit on somebody in the 5th round. I just don't buy that logic that, oh, they did it with Stephon Diggs in 2015. They can do it again. They trust their scouting process. Right now, it's more important than ever. Like, yes, that's all very true. But how can you project that? And if you are a team that's in win now mode, and that's the conundrum here, we don't really know what they are. That's the fact. We do not know what they are, what mode they are truly in. We have not talked to Rick Spielman since free agency. We have not talked to Mike Zimmer to hear from
what's
them.
up with that?
I mean, but it's also like, what are they? Can you see that they're doing a rebuild? Because if you can, then jobs are on the line, and then it doesn't really matter at this point what happens in the draft. But if you are in win now mode, jobs, everything on the line, things do matter about hitting on these picks. That's reality, because you're fighting to keep your job at that point, because we have not heard about any extensions, anything that's happened in that realm. But it's, I just, there are a lot of, were we so spoiled with the 2014 draft class with Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., Brandon Cooks, Kelvin Benjamin? Are we not over that yet? Like, because, yeah, that was unprecedented of how much those guys, as rookies in 2014, were able to produce. We're probably not going to, that was an anomaly. We're not going to see that again. But not every year is going to be like the 2018 draft class of receivers, or even beyond that. You can even go back years before then and pick like just really bad classes. Like, I just think when it is such a high priority to assume that you will make the same sort of impact like you could a running back and say that you'd pick a 2nd or 3rd round running back and treat the receiver position the same, I just don't think that's the right logic to take here, especially when it is such a glaring need for this team.
So let me go through a few, because recent history does kind of speak well of 2nd and 3rd round wide receivers. So 2016, Sterling Shepard, who's a good player but often injured, Michael Thomas, and Tyler Boyd are the 2nd rounders, and all 3 of them have become good NFL players, much better than the 1st round that year. And when we go to 2017, you still have Juju Smith-Schuster in the 2nd, Cooper Kupp in the 2nd. I'm not saying there's no busts, because there's busts all over the place. But a lot of times it's just an area in my mind that there are a lot of very good wide receivers that you could potentially land. And last year, with the fact that someone like Terry McLaurin is a 3rd round pick and DK Metcalf in the 2nd, the reason for me is because there's so many good ones that somebody slips through the cracks every time. I think we all knew last year that Terry McLaurin was a very good prospect, and he just sort of kept sliding down the board because there were a lot of other guys that they were interested in. And I think that this draft has that potential too. Now, I'm not saying that I would pass up on Jerry Jeudy or Henry Ruggs, but if it's Denzel Mims or Michael Pittman Jr. and KJ Hill, I'm taking Michael Pittman Jr. and KJ Hill.
I'm having a hard time with this because I'm trying to draft sim as we talk, and I'm going through this in the scenario of, Courtney, you are not allowed to pick a receiver in the 1st round. And that's fine. But at 22, I just got Eter Gross-Matos, who is the edge rusher from Penn State. And when I'm sitting here at 25 waiting, I can either go with Xavier McKinney, the safety out of Alabama. Neville Gallimore's still available, but I think there would be an uprising if there were 2 defensive linemen taken and back-to-back picks and a cornerback not addressed. Do I go all the way down? The best next cornerback available is A.J. Terrell from Clemson. Sure, I would. I don't think I'd be overdrafting there, because on this board, he's right about where I'd expect. But then I'm passing up people who are still on my board, like T. Higgins, like Brandon Ayuk, I believe his name is, the guy from Arizona State. Yeah. Denzel Mims is still there. Like, if this is the way that we're projecting it, and those players are available, particularly Higgins and Mims, who you and I have talked about at length being good fits for this team and this offense, why would you pass them up? Why would you say, oh, well, we're overdrafting, we could do that in a 2nd or 3rd round and be just fine? Like, there's no reason to be gun shy because of what happened years ago with Laquan Treadwell, and you didn't get Michael Thomas. Okay, big deal. All of the intel on Treadwell was the same. Like, I think we honestly need to move on from that, because a lot of my mentions on Twitter, people bring that up as an example, and it's like, okay, that's just not relevant right now.
Well, no, of course not. I mean, everyone's different. For me, it's entirely about an odds play. Like, where am I more likely to get a very good receiver and reduce my odds of having this thing go bust? Like you mentioned, you need someone to make an impact right away. Between two good receiver prospects versus one great receiver prospect, I just think the odds would lean toward two good receiver prospects have a better chance of one of them making an instant impact.
Okay.
And maybe if you're lucky, they both turn out to be really great players and you have two. But more likely than not, if you draft two of them, that one of them is going to be a good player, the other one maybe not as good. But if you're putting all of your eggs in the one basket, if the guy goes bust, you're just sort of
Sure.
SOL, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you're
no,
just
I
out of
get, I
luck.
get it, I get it. And if you have a second or third round guy, if you wait, and I just went through this, I told you I got Gross Matos from Penn State, and then at 25, I took Ezra Cleveland from Boise State. So my second round pick, the guys that are available at receiver, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Michael Pittman, Lynn Bowden Jr. from Kentucky. I think, in KJ Hamler is still there as well. I think any of those guys would be good fits for you. And for the case what we're making right now, I'll go ahead and take the player from Michigan. Then you're anticipating, and this is maybe the way that they go, that if they do this ladder route and they say, hey, we understand we really like Denzel Mims, we really like T. Higgins. Obviously, if they had any chance of Judy or CeeDee Lamb dropped, you definitely want to try to scoop them up, especially Judy because of how good he is as a route
That's
runner.
the exception for sure.
Yeah, like that's definitely the exception to the rule. But if you're going this second strategy where you're like, well, we need to address cornerback, we need to address the defensive line, maybe even an offensive tackle, then you're thinking, okay, Irv Smith Jr., and they really liked what they saw from him. He had a really good rookie season and is primed for a nice breakout year in 2020. Then you're anticipating that he's kind of in that mix and he's going to be taking on a huge part of that target share and filling the void. And then maybe you won't even need to ask that much from the number two receiver, or at least put as many expectations
Right.
as you would expect on a rookie, because you could split that up between Tajay Sharp, whomever you draft. In this case, for me, it was Donovan Peoples-Jones in the second round, and then maybe even get a Michael. Help me here. Tyler Johnson. Why do I keep want to call him Michael Johnson, like the runner? What is wrong with me?
So fast in 96.
It's just weird. But no, I mean, I could understand it from that if you're looking at it that way. But let's stop acting like first round receivers are a complete bust and a waste of a pick, especially.
Right. Yeah, of course not.
I mean, there are the exception to the rule, like what you mentioned, the guys that are probably going to be top 15 picks in both CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. I mean, they are the elite of this class, but there are also some really, really talented guys that are going to be on the board there that if the Vikings don't take them at 22 or 25, other teams are going to.
Yeah, no, you're right. The thing about where they're at with 22 and 25 is that someone will drop. We just don't know who. And I would change this entire conversation if it's one of the top receivers. I mean, if Henry Ruggs is there or if Jerry Jeudy is there, then I would say, oh, well, of course, take them because they're the guy that dropped.
Sure.
You had them as the eighth best player on your board and you end up with them at 22. Then you've got to do that. But looking at this draft, I got a tweet from Ben who said it's a historic receiver draft, so you want to take one in the first. I look at it the opposite way. If it's a historically deep draft, then you want to take one not in the first. You want to take one later on because the difference between even the best players and your second rounders are not going to be that much different in terms of what the quality of the prospect. And that's the way that I'm looking at it. I would still say the odds are decently high that they would take someone like Denzel Mims or T. Higgins. I want to